What do we want to talk about today? Let's just move on to the next slide. So what we want to talk about today is how to elevate yourself as a director, and specifically we'll go through the contents of the Applied Directorship program, a little bit about why we constructed it the way we did, what to expect, etc., and what's in the program. And the first thing I want to talk about is, get my mouse to work, what really drives me. So I came from England originally, came to South Africa, and have absolutely fell in love with this place and arrived in 1992. And along the way, I've learned in various different businesses that there is a big difference between what we think we understand about being a director and the reality. So I was one of those people that was appointed a director, but never attended a board meeting and had no idea what the responsibilities were. I just signed a piece of paper because it meant that I got provisional tax and I could potentially manage my tax affairs more easily. But in the organization, we never had board meetings in the South African branch. Moving into other companies, starting to get a bit of understanding about what the difference was between directors and shareholders, but again, got put on a board where majority of the people on the board were actually shareholder representatives. So trying to understand what the difference was, what is a director for, what is their role, what is their responsibility. And what really is driving me now is this concept of the difference between good directors and great directors. And since I've joined Sirdar in 2013, I've really started to see how great directors can fundamentally change lives because they have an impact on all of the stakeholders that are linked to a particular organization. So whether it's the obvious ones like the staff and the suppliers, maybe the clients, but it's also the community, the environment, all of those other things which we're seeing a lot more reference to in the press. So how do we make sure that we are leading those organizations, driving those organizations, either that we are part of from an operational perspective or that we're on the board of as a non-exec director, and really change lives, employ more people, etc., etc. So what I want to talk a little bit more about today is what does it mean to be a director, and what should you be looking out for when you're looking at a company and potentially want to join that company as a non-exec director. So first question, so please put your answers in the chat box. 3 things that you don't need any training for, but that can have a significant impact on society. So let's have some guesses in the chat. 3 things, and they're more sort of, I suppose, vocations, not so much all of them are vocations, but there's something that we do, something that is part of our lives that we have a role and responsibility for, but we didn't need any training for it. We didn't need to go to school to do it. We didn't need to pass any qualifications to do it, etc. Vision, empathy, and flexibility. Now I'm thinking more of a role. So give you a clue. One of them is director. So what are the other 2? Parenthood. Yes, good guess. Awesome. We'll get into that one. And the third one, what do we hear about in the news that's not working so well all the time? People have a role, but they're definitely not taking responsibility for it. Cool. Well, the first one was parenting. So we have a choice. All we need to really do is find someone who is willing to have a child with us, or unwilling. It depends on the circumstance, I guess, but the child appears. And then as a parent, we need to make a decision. Are we going to be, so in this one, well, am I going to be the golfing dad? Am I going to be the super dad? Am I going to be the fishing dad? Am I going to be the involved and playing and supporting my kids' dad? What am I going to do as a parent? And again, I didn't need to pass any exams to become a parent. I didn't need to do any training courses apart from maybe helping and supporting my wife in prenatal classes. But again, that's not compulsory. It's just if you want to keep the relationship going, it's a really good idea. So we've become a parent, and we now need to make a choice about whether we want to be a great parent, an okay parent, or actually we don't want to be a parent at all. So this was a really interesting car sticker that I saw where the dad figure has obviously been removed. There was a sort of bare outline left on the window where dad was no longer part of that family. So for whatever reason, you move on and become separated from that family. So we have a choice as a parent, but we don't have training. The same as a politician. So the president of Ecuador was one of the, in a country that could potentially be one of the wealthiest, has a higher per capita GDP than pretty much every other country in the world. And the specifics was it has one of the highest per capita incomes, but the vast majority hardly have access to clean drinking water, and they have the world's highest under 5 mortality rate. So is this politician doing their job? Did they need any training to be there? No, they just needed someone to vote for them, or a large enough group of people to vote for them to be there. But as a politician, we have a choice. Do we want to do what's in the best interest of us or a small cadre, or do we want to do what's in the best interest of everybody, of all stakeholders? And the same really applies for a director. So we need to make that commitment that we are going to be a great director. And we need to make that commitment to make sure that we are trained, that we are constantly upgrading our skills, that we are looking at all areas of self-development, because, as we'll get into in a little bit later, being a director is like being a parent. You need to have a whole range of skills in order to perform effectively. So what are we going to do as individuals? Are we going to make that choice of being a great director? Or are we going to be that seat warmer director, that director who hardly ever shows up, that's there because of their name or because of who they're representing on that board? So just to give some sense of who's in the room, can you just put that poll up, Sally, of the difference between shareholder, director, and manager, just so I get some sense of who we've got in the room? If you can just put that poll up quickly. So tick one or more that apply. So if you are a shareholder manager, that means you are a shareholder and a director and a manager in one entity. If you are just an executive director in a particular entity, tick that one as well. And if you're a non-exec director in anything as well, then please tick that. So it's multiple. And if we've got any aspiring non-exec directors. So basically, I'll be talking to all of you, but the context will be slightly different, obviously, based on your starting point. Good. So it looks like we've got a good cross-section. In fact, all of the different segments. Awesome. So we've got a majority aspiring non-exec directors, but we've got a good selection of shareholders, executive and non-executives. That's fantastic. Great. Let's move that the way so I can see my screen. So what I really want to find out from you, or what you to think about, is what should I know next? Ask that question for yourself. If you've got a question specifically you want to get answered in this session, then, as I said, put it in the chat box or the question and answer box. But I really want to make sure that everybody thinks carefully about, what do I need to know next? Because then we can start to think about, how do we answer that question? And if the Applied Directorship program is something that will help you answer that question of what I should know next. So do you fit into one of these categories? So I run a business and looking to implement evaluating board. So particularly for those of you who are the shareholder managers or possibly executive directors, it's what can I do to make sure that I'm really adding value in that organization? So I'm just got lots of little windows here that are causing chaos. So you're running the business, you're looking to implement evaluating board. The best place to start is to upskill yourself. Because if you think about it, you're bringing in another director, whether they are a shareholder representative in terms of an investor that's coming to the business, or whether they might be some other non-exec director that you want to bring in to build this board. It's a really good idea to understand as much as you possibly can about what this board is about before you start. Because otherwise what tends to happen is the other parties that are coming in tend to dominate the conversation and said, we should do it this way. And if you don't have a reference point, then it's really difficult to say, no, actually, this is the best practice way of doing things. Taking over a family business. Again, it's really important to make sure you've got the skills and knowledge to fulfill that role. So yes, it might be sort of the next step in your journey in the family to become a director. But it's really important that you add value in that role. No business can carry a director that's not contributing, that's not part of the strategic conversation, that doesn't understand that role. And the law is getting more complicated, the requirements, the needs generally in society in terms of the way they look at companies and what their expectations are for companies are becoming much more rigorous. Responsibilities are becoming much more onerous. So even if it's a family business, it's also really important to make sure that you can be recognized for your skill and your knowledge and do a good job in that role of director. And thanks to those of you who are looking to become a non-exec director, then absolutely, if you go into that interview with some kind of certificate to say you've done some training, to be able to come up with examples, to be able to ask difficult questions of those incumbent directors or whoever's interviewing you, then you'll have a much better chance of getting that first non-exec director position. And also, having done some training, it'll give you a much better idea of what are you looking for. Are you looking for a chairman role? Are you looking for a non-exec director role? What particular skills do you bring to the table? So that when you're looking through the adverts, you can see, okay, well, I'm actually really good at the accounting dev. Why don't I try doing an audit committee as a first step? A little bit less onerous, you're not on a full board, gives you some exposure. I'll get in from that perspective. So it's all about understanding what are the relevant skills you have, because they may not be obvious if they're just management skills. What are the specific things you're good at in terms of a board context? So you can actually start to develop those skills more, read more, etc. And you have an opportunity to become a director and you want to make the most value-adding contribution you can to the board. So this really applies to anyone, particularly for the more junior directors, if you haven't got a lot of experience, is to arrive on that first day and really project that level of confidence, be able to ask the right questions, be able to contribute in the right way, and be able to identify, even in the first set of board papers, you're going through some particular things which may be risks or may be opportunities, and just wait and see if anyone else picks them up. And if they don't, then have the confidence to be that voice and get engaged in the meeting. Or you just want to develop your skills further. So particularly for those of you who've been directors for a while, I know when I did the training course when we first brought it out, I thought I'd had a lot of years of experience as a director, but suddenly realized there were massive gaps in the way and along the way that hadn't been filled and were not likely to be filled just by getting experience. You needed to read something, you needed to watch some videos, you need to actually dig into the detail and think about the detail, read the Companies Act, whatever it might be, to fill those gaps. And thankfully, that has set me in really good stead when I moved on to some boards that had some really difficult challenges, because I've got a place to go and reference it. I've got a book that I've opened and read through that I know has got the answer to that particular problem. It just makes so much difference. Or you've got a support group. You've got the people on the Applied Directorship program that you can approach and say, look, I'm really struggling with this. Has anyone else had a similar problem? You're all in this together. And even if you're an executive director, it can be really valuable to know and understand how a board works, because you're reporting up to the board, then you need to understand how that process works, how the information flow works, how best to present your ideas so the board can work with it effectively, how best to present the information and decision papers and discussion papers in such a way that there's a logical flow, that they're well constructed, that they are complete, and anybody reading them in the board has got a good idea of where you're coming from and what the recommendation is. It just makes the flow of the board process so much more effective. And also bringing the information down from the board, having an understanding of the context, then makes it much easier to disseminate information down through the rest of the organization. Or challenge the board to say, look, we're not really understanding where this is coming from and what the objective is. So as I said, make a note, please understand, think about what you want to know next. So I'm just going to go through some very brief foundations. So this concept was really trying to get the concept across of what is particularly an independent director, someone from the outside when they're coming into a board, but it applies equally to any director, is trying to get this concept across of the fact that we think something's obvious, but it may not be to everyone else in the room. So this is what a deer sees when it's looking at a bush or looking at a scene. Does anyone, like, if you've seen this picture before, or you've seen the shapes that are in this picture before, then you've probably got a pretty good idea of what it is. But just quickly stuck in the chat box, what can you see in this picture other than bushes? Are you the director that's spotting the issue, spotted the challenge, spotted the danger? Any guesses? Come on, just have a guess. Tiger. Well done, Cash. And that's the reason you can potentially see the tiger is probably because you recognize the shape of the leg, or you recognize the shape that stripes in that particular context might well be a tiger. But what if you saw it in full technicolor rather than what a deer sees, which is red-green color blindness? It's really obvious that there's something there. There's potentially a threat there. There's potentially some danger there. We need to be the directors that see in full technicolor, that we see all of the different aspects at play. We understand why cultural diversity is important. We understand why ethnic importance, religious diversity, all of those things are really important in a board, because the problem or the issue could be coming from anywhere. And if we're making big assumptions about, well, everything's green, therefore there's no danger, we're going to get caught out. So we need to see all the nuances. We need to be skilled enough to pick up that there's something just not right with these financials. I don't care what the financial director's telling me, it just doesn't make sense. This trend just looks off, or these numbers the context of these numbers is just off. There's something that we're not seeing. You need to be that person. You need to be that individual, and ideally you need more than one on the board who can see that potential danger. So I hope that helps as a concept. So craft versus enterprise. What I really want to get across here is that there is a difference between the way a business is formed and functions, and the mindset of the leadership, and the way the business is constructed. And it's really important to understand when you're going into a board or looking to put together a board for the organization you work with, or going to go onto the board of a company as a non-exec director, to understand what type of business it is. Because if it's a craft, then you're going to struggle. If it's an enterprise, then you're on the right journey, and the business and organization is on the right journey to really benefit from the board. So what's the difference? A craft is all about the knowledge of the individual. So where you'll see this is if the founder is one of those people who says things like, yeah, if you want to get something done around here, then when it get done right, then I have to do it. No, I'm in charge of all of the finance. I'm in charge of this. I make all the decisions about our products. I make all the decisions about which suppliers we use. It's all about their skill and ability. They're holding on really tight to, I know more than anyone else in this organization. My skill is at a higher level than any other person in this organization. I have to rely on myself to get things done. If a business has got that mindset, has got that construct that the founder is thinking in that way, then it's really difficult for a board to operate, because they will either ignore the board and make the decisions outside the boardroom, or they just won't even form the board in the first place, or they won't bring in directors who challenge their thinking because they want to dominate the conversation, etc. So in that context, that founder effectively owns a job. We want to make sure that we're working with enterprises that are able to operate without the involvement of the founder on a day-to-day basis. In other words, they've made that choice that they want to move up and out of the way of the rest of the organization coming through. They've made that choice. They're going to build a team, and they're going to build a team of individuals that are better than them at as many areas as possible, so they can move up with the organization, look at the next horizons, look at the next opportunities. And in that context, bringing someone in as a non-exec director, forming a board, is so much easier, because you can work with that individual or that founding individuals to think about the strategy, get out of the weeds, put their head above the parapet, and see where we can take this organization next. So and what happens is an enterprise then develops its own significant value and continues to grow and develop despite the non-involvement, death, or retirement of the founder. So you're starting to build a proper legacy. A craft, if you lose the founder for whatever reason, sickness or death, or they just get fed up and move on, then often the organization crumbles because it was them that was holding it together. We want to build a system. We want to build an organization that depends on a team, on a brand that's bigger than the founder, so that we can take this organization to its full potential. And that's when a board and directors can really add value, is when they're in that sort of context. So look out for those kind of organizations. Dig into the conversation with your own organization and think about, well, are we running this as a craft, which is all about the skill and creativity and abilities of leadership of the founders? Or are we building a team and we're constantly bringing in more and more and more qualified people so that we can move up into more and more of a strategic thinking place as the founders? So enterprise has nothing to do with you. It's all about the team. The game rules are different. This is the difference between playing rugby and playing tennis or golf or whatever, where the golf player can't play anymore. There is nothing left. They don't earn anything else. Whereas as an enterprise, if individuals fall away or aren't skilled enough to move the business to the next level, it doesn't mean the enterprise stops. We just bring in the next team player to take it to the next level. So what is the role of a director and what is governance? So the role of a director is really about the leadership, the strategy, the governance, and the governance piece is about the policies and procedures. So as a board, as a director, that's why I'm so passionate about making sure that we have great directors, because we should be leaders in the strategy of the organization. We should be leaders in the values of the organization. Anybody looking from the outside in or from the rest of the organization upwards must see that leadership. We must be able to present that leadership in such a way that everybody gets it. Okay, this is what we're about. This is where we're going. And then hold the rest of the organization accountable and drive in the processes and the policies and the procedures to make sure that the delivery is consistent so that the organization works like a smooth running engine and we can start moving on to the next challenge, moving on to the next opportunity. So in case you didn't know, governance comes from Kubernetes, which means to steer or pilot a ship. So one of the earliest examples of this, and if this reference helps you sort of frame it in your minds, one of the earliest references of this difference between shareholders, directors, and managers was really when a ship set sail. So shareholders helped build the ship, they funded the ship, they decided what kind of ship it was, then the captain and the officers took control over the ship and took the mandate from those shareholders and said, right, what type of ship is it? Okay, where do you want us to go? Where don't you want us to go? What cargo can we carry? What cargo can't we carry? Cool. Now it's up to the captain and the officers to take that vessel and fulfill the requirements of the shareholders. Go to the port, go and fetch the goods, bring them back. So that from the moment that ship leaves port, the directors need to understand, right, what are the capabilities of this boat? Where can we take it? Where can't we take it? What sort of weather can we take it in? Is this only we can only use it in a river, or can we take it out into the open ocean? And then we get the crew, the management, to do whatever it is that needs to be done to make the ship go forward, whether it's row, put the sails up and down, etc. But the moment that ship leaves port, the shareholders are no longer involved. They get their payback at the end of the year or the end of the voyage or whenever it is that you pay the dividend. And in the business, it's no different. But too often, because it's our business, because we started it, because we're the majority shareholder, we think that everything about it is ours, and we must have our hands in everywhere, meddling with the operations. With our shareholder hat on, we cannot do that. We can only do that if we have an operational role, and that's part of our role and responsibility. And even as a director, we shouldn't be involved in the operations. We should be helping to set the framework, guide the company to move forward in a particular direction. So the roles that we talk a lot about on the Applied Directorship program, and really it's the fundamental to our understanding of where directors fit is this whole concept of the three hats of shareholders, directors, and managers. So shareholders have multiple sizes of shareholding, so they have different voting powers, that have different types of shares that allow the non-voting shares or preference shares or whatever it might be. And it tends to be a self-ish relationship with the organization, because I've put money in, I've put time in, I'm expecting a return on that investment as a shareholder. There's a hard line between shareholders and the board, because as I said, it should be a once or twice a year engagement between shareholders and the board. There should be a reporting line that goes up to shareholders, but there shouldn't be any involvement in the day-to-day of the organization from shareholders. The board is a very different place, because unlike shareholders, which is not a team of equals, it's entirely dependent on how many shares you have, the board is always a team of equals, and it should always be operating on the basis of selfless service to the company. So we have a selfless relationship with the company. We do everything in the best interest of the company. We don't have conflicts, and if we do have conflicts of interest, then we step out of the meeting. Management is a dotted line, because there's quite a lot of communication that goes backwards and forwards between the board and management, and there's often several people who are on the board that are also part of management. But ideally, you want that communication to go through that narrow funnel, that the CEO MD role, so that you're in the board thinking as directors, and then you're setting action items for the CEO to then disseminate that information through the rest of the organization. And then in our specific operational role, we pick up that instruction from that leader, from the CEO. We don't take it straight from the board into operations. We are now reporting to the CEO from an operational perspective based on our roles and responsibilities. So it's separating those hats is so critical. So traits needed of a director: you need to be a leader. You need to lead from behind. You need to be encouraging. You need to be training. You need to be mentoring, coaching, counseling, mediating, etc., to help the team be a better team, whether it be the team of the board or the team as an organization as a whole. How do we contribute as individuals? We need to present that leadership. We need to have a high EQ. We need to have a good level of self-understanding, self-awareness, etc., to really be effective. We need to be calm and in control of emotions. It doesn't help if the directors are all shouting at each other, because you're not going to get any work done. You're not going to be able to come to a conclusion, make a decision, and move on. If there's dissent in the board, it needs to be resolved in the board, because as soon as you leave the room, that you've all party to that decision, regardless of whether even you voted against it in that moment. The moment you leave the room, that was the decision of the board. And we leave the room as a team of directors, not as individuals. And a broad knowledge of business obviously helps. So we're talking about marketing, we're talking about HR, we're talking about whatever other aspect of the operations. We need to have a broad understanding of how those work and how they fit together. And it's absolutely critical that we have financial competence. We can't just rely on the financial manager anymore. We need to be able to understand and read the financials ourselves. We are all equally responsible when we sign those audited financials. We need to make sure that they are correct and that we understand what's in them. So there's 5 phases of growth of business, and I think what I really want to try and get across here was the concept that there are particular phases where, as again mentioned before, where a director can really add value. There are phases where it's going to be difficult. So in that creativity phase, where we're going through the defining the products and services and deciding which markets we're going to be in, that creativity phase, it's very much about the founders, very much about the ideas of the entrepreneurs to take the organization forward. Now you start to get to a point where direction and strategy overall starts to become more important. And then as a leadership team, you need to start delegating. Once you've delegated, now you've already created distance between the activity and yourself, and it becomes more of a role of coordination. And then as the business gets bigger, you're now starting to talk about collaboration with completely different business entities, business divisions, etc. So it's one level above coordination. And where we really start to get involved as a director is when you've moved out of the leadership phase to something which is closer to autonomy, but there's a crisis of autonomy. I don't want to let go. So the first phase is the crisis of leadership, is I can't lead this business any further. I've reached my limit from a leadership perspective. I need to bring in other leaders. The next one is autonomy. I don't want to let go of everything. It's that delegation piece. I'm too scared to let go of all of these bits and pieces because I don't believe anyone else can do it as well as I can. And then it takes one step further that I'm losing control. This thing is just running without me. And if you don't have proper processes and procedures, etc., that are being monitored, then you will lose control. And then it comes into, as a bigger organization, and we've all seen it with large corporates. One of the reasons why entrepreneurs typically don't want to be too corporate is because of that red tape. And then as you get to massive organizations, there's a whole another level of complexity and potential crises that can happen. So this is a you can find this on the internet, the 5 phases of growth. And really the bit that we're looking at is this middle piece, this as you move into growth through direction and that crisis of autonomy, now you're starting to grow through delegation. So you're understanding I need to delegate some things to the board, I need to delegate some things to the CEO, and I need to delegate a whole bunch of other things to the rest of the organization. And start to support the leadership in the executive leadership as they go through that crisis of control. Help and support them to go into that growth through coordination and take them through all the different phases. So if you're talking to a company that really hasn't got to the point where they're starting to make meaningful inroads into delegating, then it's going to be really difficult as a director. So it becomes more of a coaching role, more of a mentoring role. So it's being aware of where the company is on this line can really help in terms of how you engage with the company and how you really add value as a director. So it's one of a high performance director creating meaningful economic impact and social impact as well through their role on the board, and not afraid to have the tough conversations and not afraid to do the mundane stuff like reading the papers, being prepared for the meeting, etc., to enable board success. And the board is one of that's that rhythm. It's we have a meeting, then we do the minutes, then we prepare for the next meeting, we get the board papers out early, etc., etc. That rhythm builds momentum, and if you get that rhythm going well, momentum can build really fast. To the point that often, if you've built too much momentum, you have to take a pause and say, well, okay, let's just focus on getting stuff done. And one of the boards I'm on at the moment is being through that massive momentum for the last 18 months. Now we've just got too many things on our plate. Now we just slow down. Let's go back, focus these 3 things the next while, then those 3 things the next while. But the change in the mindset, the change in everybody's roles along that journey has shifted incredibly quickly. So what are the companies saying? Why did we come up with a supplier directorship? Why is it important? They said, give us directors who have practiced their skill and experience in a boardroom. Now, if directors can't get the skill elsewhere, where do they get the skill? So you can do the Institute Director courses. I highly recommend it because if you need to understand King 4, if you need to understand Companies Act at a deep level, then that's the best training to do. We focus specifically on the practical aspects. You walk into the boardroom, now what? You've got this name of director, you are on the board. What does that mean? What does that practically mean? What am I supposed to do between board meetings? What am I supposed to do in the board meeting? What am I supposed to pick up and look for, etc., in board papers? So by doing the course, you will have developed a certain level of skill and experience in a boardroom because there are 8 simulated board meetings. So you've got some real life experiences with a group of relative strangers that you've been on a board with that you could then communicate to someone when they're asking you questions in an interview. And just because someone's a chief executive doesn't mean that they'll know how to relate to me as a director, but also not necessarily how to perform in a board meeting, because they're used to being in charge, whereas in the board, no one's in charge. The chairman's in charge of making sure the meeting runs smoothly, but everyone's an equal. What I want to hear, as if I'm chairman of the board, I want to hear everyone's perspective. I want to hear everyone's opinion. Everybody has a voice that is equal. I don't want one particular person to dominate the conversation. I want to make sure that everybody's had their turn. And often if we've got a very strong chief executive that's now looking for a position on a board, it's often difficult to change that mindset of talking too operationally and wanting to be pushing things along without necessarily getting everyone else together and on board. And then when we're talking to companies, they want to know that we can confirm that this person knows what they're doing. So what better way to have watched you go through this 11-month program to be able to say to the company at the end who's looking for a new director, yep, this person really worked well, they worked well in the team, they're really clued up on the content, I would highly recommend this individual. And we obviously haven't seen them on a live board, but we've seen them in enough board meetings to get a sense of that they get what it's all about. And it's not about certification, because we want, like, as I said before, it's like, well, I don't need a certificate to have a baby. I don't need a certificate to have a director, to be a director, but I need to know how to self-regulate. I need to know how to do self-reflection. I need to know, go and find information and build knowledge myself. And passing an exam doesn't really help that learning process. We're not running lectures and you pass an exam and you move on and forget about everything you've done. We want this to become part of a habit, part of a process that we continue to build on over time. So we want to repeat the process, repeat the process, repeat the process in a controlled environment, so that when you go out into the wide world and sit on a board of someone else's company, you've got some kind of foundation that you can call on to help you move forward and move through the situations. So a lot of the course is about self-reflection exercise. How did that board meeting go? How did I show up? What could we do better, etc., etc. And those are the kind of skills and abilities we want you to develop, because they will serve you well in the outside world. Whereas just doing lecturing and exam and question and answer kind of stuff is not necessarily going to fulfill that mandate. So it's everything about leadership and governance is just a continuous work in process. You can never stop. You never stop learning. There's always something new to learn. So we need to be inquisitive, we're curious, we need to be going and finding new things, speaking to new people to learn more and bring that experience back into our circumstance so we can do a better job. So what's all the Applied Directorship program all about? So we have taken the view that we wanted to focus on directorship. So along that journey, we focused on being the global leader in education, appointment and guidance of boards as a continuum. So the education helps and supports with the appointments, helps and supports with the ongoing support for boards. We use the same methodology throughout. So if you've done an education program, then when you're working with us as a director on a board, then it's the same principles will apply. The company secretarial team will use the similar templates to the ones that have been used in the education. And when we're appointing, the checklist we go through is going to be the same kinds of things that we would have taught in the education program, and the same kinds of things we'll be helping to implement when we're working with the board. And yes, we focus on privately held and family businesses because we've realized that that's one of the best places to learn, because if you're a director on a privately and family business, you need to add value. You're not there because you're there. You're not there because it says so in some kind of legal act or because there's a specific requirement in your industry. You're there because you add value. So if we can learn how to make sure directors add value, then that's applicable anywhere. So people who've done this program are working for government. They're working for NGOs. They're working in private companies. They're working in large corporates. They're working in SEOs, because the knowledge is universal. If you're a good director, it's like being a good business person. That is translatable across pretty much any type of business organization. And you can't learn just by doing a degree. We've talked about this. There's got to be some kind of practice. Just like you can't climb a mountain just by reading a book. You need to have tried a small one, a medium one, a large one. And it's a similar kind of concept with boards. Start with a small, fairly easy board that doesn't meet very often, and then move into one that's a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex. The organization's got a few more issues you need to deal with, and then move towards where you're in committees and you're on monthly boards and you've got all kinds of papers floating around in between the meetings, voting on things that you didn't have time to do in the meeting. So how do you process that? How do you manage that? How do you act effectively as a director? And it requires time, energy, and guidance. So we want to make sure if you do the 11-month program, then you have almost certainly got time to be a director as a non-exec director on a board. or even be a fully fledged, effective executive director on the board, because the time requirements are similar. So the entire program is based on the principle that this is the work you need to be doing if you were serving on a company that had monthly board meetings. So we've got the 8 board meetings once a month. You're in the room or on a Zoom call with your cohort in a board meeting, going through the process. It's no different from when you're on a non-exec director on someone else's board or executive director on your own board. So what's it constructed of? So the main thing is it's similar to an MBA, but different in that an MBA is focused on management training. This is focused exclusively on directorship training. So if you want to be a better manager and you want to be a better MD or CEO, then it's a good idea to do an MBA. If you want to be a better director, then the applied directorship program is going to give you the skills and best practices to do that job. So I said before, there are different roles between shareholder, director, and manager. So we're talking to the director piece in the middle. And having done the management and having done the MBA and having been an MD definitely helps in your broader understanding of business. But this program is not covering the same material. It's covering directorship stuff. And we don't want to make it like a 1 week or a 1 month compressed program. We want to make it spread out so you fit real life in around it. You need to make sure that you're experiencing something that's similar as possible to the real outcome in the end. We don't want it to be board meetings one day after the other, because that's not real. You haven't got distractions. You haven't got other things coming to play. We also want you to think about what's happening in the business you're working with and how do you apply that? How do you take the knowledge from the program and apply it practically? How do you look at the problem you've had in the real world and bring that into the training to get a resolution, to talk about it amongst the rest of the people in your cohort, to use the facilitator to help you and support you to answer those questions. So it's theory and simulation, not one or the other. So we cover the theory mostly online with videos, with audios, with reading, and then the simulation is in the sessions where, as I said, we go through and have simulated board meetings. So you cover all the different aspects of learning. It's you see it, you read it, you do it, and you repeat. So it's thinking about, as a director, what do we need to know? How do we operate effectively as a team? So you practice that, as I said, in the simulated board meetings, using the simulated company, and then you learn the methodology. So we've learned over the last 12 years that if you have all 3 of these elements working effectively, then you have a much more effective organization, and you definitely have a much more effective board. Typically, people tend to focus on the director. They don't work well as a team, and very few companies use any kind of well mapped out methodology. So that's what we're trying to teach in this program, is all of those aspects, so that at the end you know what a high performance board looks like, and then you can make a choice of whether you go in that direction and whether you drag the rest of your board kicking and screaming in that direction or not. But at least you know what it looks like. So it's making sure we have strong directors, making sure we have a strong boardroom composition. So there's an element of helping and supporting you to understand how you put together a board, what are the parameters, what are the things you need to look for when you're putting together a board. And then that methodology ties everything together and acts as that lever. So if all 3 of those elements are working well together, now you've got a really strong force that can help to start move company performance. And you can really have an impact quickly. So the governance compass is really the sort of foundation of all of our training. As I said, it's something we look at when we do an assessment of a company, when we're looking to appoint a director to that company. We do the same or similar kind of assessment when we're looking to run a guide support process for a company. We would go through each of these 8 elements and score that organization based on its level of maturity. So during the program, you will do simulated board meetings where the main topic of discussion at each meeting is one of these 8. Now, because it's a perfect environment, you can go through the 8 in the clockwise order and get that sort of flow and momentum going. In the real world, we understand you may not necessarily do it in that perfect order, because you've got when do you have to do your audit, when do you have time to go and do your strategy, etc. It may not be a perfect flow. But we do know and understand that you need to start with getting the strategy and direction right in an organization, then understanding what the organizational culture should be, needs to be, what are we moving towards, and does it tie up and work with the strategy? Now we've got enough of a sort of foundation to understand, well, have we got effective leadership? Are they leading based on the values that we've defined for this organization? Are they leading us forward based on the strategy requirements? Are they the right people to take us in that direction? And now you can start thinking wider. Okay, what are the stakeholders involved? Thinking about the shareholders, because obviously you need to make sure that the shareholders are happy, because if they're not getting a return, they're not going to want to put money or time in the future. And so it goes around the wheel. So this is something that we talk about in the guide part of any board, anywhere, needs to cover these 8 segments at least once during the course of a 12-month period. So you get to live that, you get to experience that on the Applied Directorship program as you go through the modules. You also get a copy of Traversing the Avalanche. The other book that we have available is Laws of Extreme Business Success, which is very useful for management and particularly for families. It was written for family businesses. So you read, during the 11 months, you read Traversing the Avalanche, a couple of chapters each month. So by the end of the program, you'll have read the full book. And that gives you some detail. Other detail will be in videos. Other detail will be in the practical aspects. Contribution Compass is something you get as part of the program, which we use a lot when building teams. So it's what we call a preference tool, and it helps define, as an individual, what is my preference? Do I prefer to be involved in activating type of situations, which is about new ideas, new innovations? Do I prefer to be in that inspiring energy space, which is about inspiring and leading the people? Do I prefer to be in the sustaining space, which is very much about operational processes, etc., or do I prefer to be in the refining energy space, which is very much about the data, the analysis, the processing things, thinking things through, coming up with an idea based on some kind of facts? And we use, so as I said, everybody on the program does the profile. We will build your boards that you are serving in during the profile based on this profiling tool to try and get a spread of different people across the circle. And then we highly recommend that you think about implementing it in your own organizations, because it's a massively valuable tool. So the first month, the first one we've got coming up is in October, will be the introduction. Then the second month, as I said, we go through the process of how do you build a board, and how do you use the Contribution Compass to do that. And we talk about the board calendar and the process and cycles for the year. Then in module 3, you start to have your first board meeting. So you get into the first simulated board meeting, and the topic will be strategy and direction, where you as a team now define the strategy of your little company in the simulated world. So each of the teams runs their own company in the same market with the same product, and they drive that business forward throughout the rest of the program. 4, we're moving around the circle, so we get the organizational culture. Thank you, Sally. In the chat box, he's put the application form in there. Excuse me. Now, the 4th module, we talk about organizational culture. Some really good videos on how is culture developed, why it's so important. You know, the culture eats strategy for breakfast, mainly because if you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the culture that supports it, then it's going nowhere. Then you start talking about the effective teams. So there's an example of a chief executive performance process. So what does that look like? How do you work through it as a board? And then talking about, well, how do we manage succession planning? Really, really important in this day and age is making sure that we've got proper succession planning built into our system. We make sure that we're not entirely reliant on any key individuals, because if they get sick, then the business collapses or is severely weakened. Then you go to have a conversation about stakeholder engagement. What does that mean? What are the social, the environmental responsibilities, all of those kind of things? Again, really critical as we move into the space of maturity across the world in terms of understanding the impact that business really have on the communities that they work with. Shareholder returns and expectations. So you should be thinking about a shareholder statement of intent. So we go through a few examples, and also start to think about why do you choose a particular dividend policy? What does that do? What does that What difference does it make? What kind of shareholders does it attract or repel as an organization? And lots of, again, videos and readings are related to that topic. Then as you come around the other side of the governance compass, we start talking about risk appetite, tolerance. How do you put together a risk matrix? What kinds of things do you need to think about? I mean, that could be a whole course on its own. Then thinking about the finance, budgets, management reporting. What does a good management report look like, or finance report look like, that coming into a board paper? Often they're way too much detail, or not enough detail about the critical things that we need to be seeing. Or they're presented in such a way that it's all about the budget, but meanwhile, the world's changed. You know, if you think about your budget you set at the beginning of 2020, it may have had absolutely no relationship to the reality within a couple of months. So how do we make sure that the financials are, let's look at the actuals, but let's redo the forecast. As soon as we have new information, we redo the forecast. Yes, we're going to compare it against our budget overall because we've made specific strategic decisions based on that budget, but we need to make sure that we are looking at the best information we can as a board so that we can start adjusting and tweaking before it becomes a problem. We can see that cash flow crunch happening. We can see that revenue crunch. And are we going to have to think about laying people off, etc., or growing, or whatever it might be? And then the last piece is where you do a board evaluation. So you go through a board evaluation process where you evaluate the board you've just served in for the last 7 meetings. So it gives you an idea, it gives you a concept of the value of it, gives you an idea of the process. So again, going out into the real world, you can have a conversation with someone. So look, I think, why aren't we doing an annual board evaluation? We're doing evaluations for our team, but why aren't we doing an evaluation as a board? So it's 11 months in total, maximum of 20 people in the cohort. We want to keep it small. We want to keep it so that people are engaged, they're sharing knowledge and understanding, they're working together with each other and learning from each other. And as soon as you get more than about 20, 25, it becomes really difficult to do that. It becomes more like a lecture. You'll be in 3 or 4 boards of directors, depending on how many people are in the cohort. There are 8 simulated board meetings, which I've mentioned, and the sessions are 4 hours per month. So they're made up of a little bit of facilitation, a bit of reflection about what happened in the previous month, the stuff that you've been reading and watching in the previous month. And then you have your simulated board meeting, and then a bit of a closeout to start reflecting on the board meeting process and where did you get stuck and what questions do you have, etc. And then you move on to the next topic and the next topic. So we try and make sure the month is sort of compartmentalized into the particular topic. You don't get access to the stuff that's coming in the future. You only get access to the stuff that you've already been through. So we get a lot more focus, and we don't get people reading miles ahead and then not necessarily spending the amount of time they should on that particular topic. And just to get a sense, typically, if you're serving on a board with a monthly board meeting, you need to be putting at least half a day, probably a day aside to read the board papers, think about it, do some more research, have a conversation with the MD if you're stuck with anything, etc. This is not that dissimilar. So it's probably 3 to 4 hours a week. You need to watch the videos, to do the reading, to do the prep for the board meetings. We don't want you to do it the night before, just like you shouldn't be doing it the night before a board meeting. To spread it out, plan your diary. You know when the session is. We give you the list for the full year, so work it out. I'm going to make sure I do that stuff on a Sunday that weekend, or I'm going to make sure that on my way to work I watch all those, listen to those audios or whatever it might be, so that you start to schedule your workload just as if you were serving on a real board as a non-exec director. And it's a network of like-minded individuals. Everybody in the training is either director or wants to be a director. So you've got a real opportunity to share experiences and learn from each other. As I said, you get a certificate of attendance and a certificate of competence, but there's no NQF levels attached to this, unfortunately. So reinforce your knowledge, understand your director's duties, develop an understanding effective high-performance board and governance methodology, enable you to experience the high-performance board through a simulation, and ensure working knowledge of all of the essential tools that you might need in the real world afterwards. Demonstrate practical expertise, so you can talk about it, you can demonstrate it, you've got an understanding of how the methodology works that you can apply in your own organization. And work out what your particular strengths and opportunities are. Do you want to be a chairman? Then pursue that. If you don't, then don't pursue it. Do the opposite. What am I going to do instead? What is my particular role on the board? Where do I add value? Is it sitting back and listening and then putting some idea into the meeting, or is it drawing out information from others? What is my strength in that context? Just a sort of warning. So yes, doing this program will definitely help you get a board appointment, but it's not going to guarantee you get a board appointment. Just like if you do a degree, it doesn't guarantee you're going to get a job. It's about your network, it's about circumstances, it's about luck, it's about all kinds of other things, but it's basically about starting a new career. So we can get you on the road, give you the foundation, give you the relevant degree, as it were, to take this career forward, but we can't guarantee you're going to get a job. That's up to you. No time for this, then no time for the boardroom. So I really think it's important to understand that if you're struggling to work out how much time you've got for this program, then you're probably going to struggle to be an effective director, particularly if you're looking to be a non-exec director. But even on your own board as an executive, it takes up a lot of time. So you need to be in a situation where you've pulled yourself out of the weeds. You're not as operationally focused anymore. You're starting to have time to think strategically. And that's when you'll really get the benefit of being a director and also the benefit of doing the training. So I invite you to join the program so you can challenge your thinking, improve your prospects, begin your journey as a long high-performance director. And as Buffett says, the best investment is in yourself. Spend the money. 10% for the whole way through my learning part of my life, when I was spending a fortune on different courses, the most sort of common wisdom was spend 10% of your income on learning. And it's absolutely true. Even if it's just 10% of your time on learning, it makes a massive difference. It builds huge momentum. So yeah, invest in yourself. So this is the US dollar price, which applies to pretty much anywhere outside South Africa. There is a different rate for South African residents. Contact me if you didn't come onto this call through a particular affiliate or salesperson. I'll give you your contact details in a second. But as I said, there may be different pricing for different regions. And just as a sort of trying to prompt some action, if anybody signs up before close of business or end of day on Sunday, then my personal contribution to you or incentive to you is give you contribution compass tokens for your executive team, and I'll put together a team report and give you a short feedback session on what that team report is telling you. So that'll be valuable in understanding how your executive team works and where the problems and challenges might be coming from. If you can just put up that poll for the next steps, please, Solly. So this is the code for the ADP online program. I see Solly's put the long form version in the chat box. So if you click on that, then you get a form that looks a bit like this with the dates at the bottom. So it's a short, not so much a survey, but short information form, just to give us a sense of what your expectations are, what your level of experience is, so that we can make sure that you get the full benefit of the program. And if you just don't have enough experience, then obviously it may be a conversation to say, are you really ready for this? Because maybe we recommend you do a shorter course or do something different instead. So it's the preparation at base camp, not during the climb, that gets you to the summit. So what are you going to do when you're preparing, rather than struggle because you got the wrong equipment when you're halfway up the mountain? Why not do as much preparation as you possibly can before you start to get onto the slopes, before things start to get a little bit more hazardous, before the air starts to get a bit thin and you need to make decisions that much more quickly? Rather prepare now. Thank you very much. So any questions? As I said, if you haven't got any other contact details, then please, by all means, send me an email, give me a call, or go to the Sirdar website and get information from there. What have we got in the chat box on questions? Just call this up. Any questions on anything that we've covered so far? Any questions? So there's a question about family businesses and what difference a board can make on a family business. So typically what happens is you end up with a matriarch or patriarch who tends to dominate the conversation. So it's a bit of like that sort of craft thinking. If you can get them to let go enough to get some advice, then it really helps to have independent perspectives. And the best way to bring an independent perspective in is the board, because it's the most cost-effective way of bringing an independent perspective, really. If you're thinking of paying, I don't know, maybe R1 million for an executive to bring into the company, you could be paying 100,000 Rand to get a really well-qualified and experienced director into your organization. So there's a massive difference in the cost benefit. They're not full-time, obviously, but they're going to give you that insight that's going to shift the needle. They're going to start to help build the confidence from the founder, from the patriarch or matriarch, as I said, particularly in the family, that this business could be run by professionals, that they don't have to do it all. And if their children don't really want to get involved in the business, it doesn't mean that the business has to end. It just means that you bring in professionals to run the business, and the family continues to benefit from the dividends, etc., and the family name that's on the door of the organization, whatever it might be. That legacy can continue. But it really does start with a conversation with whoever that senior member of the family is, to say, look, let's talk this through. What does the succession plan look like? What does the plan for the future look like? Is there an opportunity for us to bring other people who can help and release that sort of the constraints that might be holding the company back, etc., etc. If they're not prepared to let go, not prepared to delegate, not prepared to have anybody else giving an opinion, then you're not going to get value from the board. But often after a conversation, after some training, after maybe talking to other people, they realize that actually this could be helpful and it could take the business forward. What are the possible questions that they can ask for an NED role with no experience? So I suppose if you're going into a conversation and you don't have a role on your CV, then it's going to be things like, if you join our board, how would you add value? Or how do you understand how the board process works? Or what's a good example? I think we've actually got a series of interview questions. Babungile, I'm just going to make a note of your name, because what I think I'll do is we've got a series of questions that we use as interview questions for directors. So that might be a really good way for you to get an understanding of what to expect, because we've found that people doing the program, the board that they're applying for is one of the boards we're working with. So guess what? We've given them the question list to the CEO or the chairman, who then asks the incoming directors the questions. Now you know the answers because the ADP gives you the answers, so you can go through and answer them. But it's not necessarily just because you've had practical experience, because a lot of boards don't teach you the right things. You know, they're teaching you bad habits. It's like your parents teaching you how to drive a car. There's a whole bunch of assumptions in there. There's a whole bunch of bad habits. There's lazy things, rules have changed, all the rest of it. So you're not necessarily learning best practice along the way, even if you have got experience. And I know some directors who've had 30 years of experience, have done the program and go, wow, I wish I'd known this 10, 15, 20 years ago. It would have saved me so much trouble. It would have saved companies even. It would have improved our return on investment, all the rest of it, because we just made dumb decisions. Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. There's one that's come up here. How soon can you have a fully fledged board for a startup? So it depends on how much if you have any money to spend, then I would suggest start with a really good quality chairman. If you have no money to spend, you can still bring in directors, but they might come in as what might be called more of an advisory board. So you don't meet as often, you don't meet as formally, but you get a group of people who you see as mentors who can help you grow the business. And this is how a lot of accelerators work. So they have a mentor that comes in and effectively has an advisor, acts as an advisory board member for various companies. So as a CEO, what is the problem you're struggling with? Then the advisory board helps and gives you some ideas, but they can't make the decision for you. You then go away and implement it yourself. If you can find someone who's willing to take the risk of being a director, They may or may not require a fee. It depends on how much they buy into the concept. So just like people are willing to serve on the board of a charity because they want to do good, they want to help and support the charity do its good work. There are also equally directors who are really keen and excited to serve on startup boards because they want to help the startup operate and move forward faster. Now they can bring their 30 years of experience to say, don't do that, do this, don't do that, do this, to try and help you move forward and get more momentum more quickly. So it really is, make sure you've got a really clear idea of where this business is going. You've got a big enough idea, and then we can place adverts on our database. You can place adverts on LinkedIn, whatever. It's saying, I need someone who, we're going here. Do you want to come with me? We need someone to serve as a director. And there are people out there that will do that. It may be surprising, but there are people who want to give that back. There's these old gray-haired guys like me who've done a lot of stuff and they really want to give back. They really want to make and help and support startups to be successful. So that and cost. So if you want to have a formal board of a company which is turning 10, 15, 20 million turnover, then you're probably looking at spending, I don't know, somewhere between $3.5 and $5 grand a month for a non-exec, and somewhere between 5 and 7.5 for the chairman. That's the sort of budget you should be aiming for. So then by the time you get to that point, then it's an affordability question. Can we improve the profitability of this company by 100, 200,000 Rand a year if we put in a board? That's the question you need to answer. And if we don't know, then can we invest that money and put that money aside to run the board for a year to see if it works? And one of the companies I'm working with, that 100,000 was not a given, but we went from 500,000 profit in a year to 5.5 million profit in a year. Now, yes, that wasn't only the board, but the board helped, and it more than paid for itself. So the challenge for a board is to continue to grow the company and improve profitability and add value going forward. But if you understand what a board's for, then you can start to think about, well, how much am I prepared to spend to get one? And how is it going to add value? Great. So if there's no other questions, thank you very much for your time. We've run a little bit over and apologize for that, but some good questions. Thank you. So I wish you well, and I wish you well on your journey of becoming high performance directors. I look forward to seeing you on our director database or applied directorship program or both. So thank you and have a great day.